You're good to go.
Okay, thank you. I would like to welcome everybody this morning to our Finance and Audit Committee meeting, and I would like to call the meeting to order. It is now 9:02 a.m. Stephanie, will you please take attendance?
Morning, of course. John Scott has not yet joined us. Mike Saltis,
Here.
Ellen McKitterick,
Here.
Adrian Cochran. Adrian has not yet joined us. Holly Williams
Here.
and Alex Marcellano. Doesn't look like he has joined us yet, but we do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And I would like to take this moment to welcome and thank any members of the public who are joining us this morning. All right, so we have a big agenda today. We're going to start with the approval of the minutes from October 28th. I would like to ask the committee for a review of the October 28th, 2022 minutes and a call to approve.
Motion to approve the October 28th minutes.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. We're going to start off this morning with a presentation of the audited financial statements. Markham, would you please provide us with audited financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2022?
Great, thank you, Holly, and thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity to meet with you this morning. We will walk you through a presentation, which is a summary of the key highlights from the audit. Damien's going to get that on the screen. And then certainly we can open the floor to questions on the financial statements or the presentation itself. And just by way of introduction, I'm Chris Jackson. I'm the audit partner. This is our second year auditing the authority, and I'm joined by Damien Kogel, who's the director on the audit, who will be sharing the presentation responsibilities with me. And again, feel free to ask questions as we go through this. The first area that we're going to focus on will be the areas of audit emphasis, and this is where we spent the majority of our time. And as Holly indicated, the financial statements were issued. We issued them back on November 10th, and we had the pleasure of meeting with Holly to go through that draft on November 8th prior to issuance, just to answer questions and to be available for any other questions on these financials as well. So certainly feel free to ask questions as we go through the program, and we'll jump right into the first area of audit emphasis, which relates to contributions. And again, we spent a significant amount of time in this area. The authority began collecting contributions in January of 2021. And the contributions receivable reflected on this page and in the financial statements represent the amounts that were collected subsequent to year end, in this case through July 1st of, from July 1st of 2022 through the end of August of 2022. And that relates to payroll periods that ended prior to June 30, 2022. And the amounts are relatively consistent, about a 5% increase in the receivables. That's the amount that's on the statement of fiduciary net position at the end of the year. And the revenue right below that line is $415 million, which is slightly more than double the amount of $205 million for 2021, which is in line with expectations based on the fact that 2021 was 6 months worth of contributions and 2022 was the full 12 months worth of contributions for the year. So those were within our expectations. There was no need for the authority to record an allowance for uncollectible contributions based on the fact that these contributions receivable were based on the actual cash collected subsequent to year end and validated. So there's no risk related to the collectability of receivables, as you may see in some organizations. So that was good. We performed some detailed testing of a sample of contributions, including confirmation with some of the employers. No exceptions were noted related to contributions, so we were comfortable with the amounts that are reported in the financial statements. So again, it's an area where we spent a significant amount of time. On the next slide, this is where we spent the majority of our time. Really, the most of our time was spent on understanding the benefit payments and the related reserves. As you're well aware, the authority began paying benefits in January of 2022. So this is really the first year that this was in play and in process. The benefit payments were administered through AFLAC. So we worked to test a sample of claims. The claims expense recorded this year was $144 million. Of this amount, 104 million represented claims that were paid prior to June 30th of 2022. The other 40 million relates to the amount of the reserve for unpaid claims. Basically, that would have started and related to leaves that were started prior to July 1st of 2022. So anything June 30, 2022 and prior, a leave that started during that period would have been accrued in this reserve. Actuaries were used from Spring Consulting to prepare a report. That report itself had a description of the methodology that was used to calculate the $40 million reserves. And those reserves are broken into 3 buckets, which is down explained in the 4th bullet, where we've got a reserve for claims that were approved and open, just were not physically paid prior to June 30th. There was also a reserve for pending claims that were not yet adjudicated. And there's also a reserve for claims that were incurred but not known by the authority as of June 30th, as those claims came through. We focused on that report. We used an actuarial consultant to help us to perform audit procedures. We also looked at subsequent claims paid to analyze the reasonableness of those reserves. And we tested the inputs that went into the Spring Consulting report by getting the underlying claim files, testing a sample of claims of participants, focusing on the right period, the amount of claims that were paid, just to ensure that we had proper cutoff at year end, because that is an audit risk, just to make sure that the reserves represented the losses that were incurred prior to June 30, or at least the leave was started prior to June 30 of 2022. And we had no exceptions with that testing. And we concluded that the reserves were fairly stated within a range of reserves. No indication of reserve understatement, which is the bigger risk from an audit standpoint. You want to make sure you've got sufficient reserves. And the reserves look to be conservative based on the subsequent cash and claims that were paid after year end. So again, no issues related to reserves. I believe Spring Consulting is on the agenda for today as well to do an update for later in fiscal year 2022 activity. So again, no exceptions. That was the area that we spent the majority of our time. Okay, if we move on to the next page, investments during 2022, investments were increased to 370 million. Resulting from the continued collections of contributions during the year. All of the investments are invested in the state's short-term investment fund. And as I'm sure you're well aware, that's a highly rated fund. It's a pool of short-term money market investments, which again is a good place to be with this current volatile market environment. It's nice to be in a low-risk pool. We confirmed those reserves, had no issues related to price testing. And again, no exceptions were noted related to investments. On the next slide, we just talked about the bond funds that were payable. The authority had received an allocation of 3.8 million of new bonds in 2022, which brought the total allocation to 16 million. There were 4.8 million of unspent bonds at the end of the fiscal year, June 30, 2022. There was no set repayment date related to these bonds as of year end. So the bonds were classified as a long-term liability. As a payment schedule is put in place, a portion of those bonds could move to the current liability section of the statement of position. But again, as of the end of the year, they're long-term and there are no issues related to the ability to pay those. And there are still, as I said, 4.8 million of unspent funds that were still outstanding at the end of the year. So again, no issues related to bonds. The next area relates to the seed funds payable. And from inception, the authority received seed funds of 5.1 million. Those were all received in the prior fiscal year. During the course of 2022, 3.8 million of these funds were repaid by the authority, and the remaining 1.3 million was repaid in fiscal year 2023, along with expectations of the payment plan that was in the documents themselves. So again, no issues there. The ability to repay those seed funds was, based on the contributions that were received to date. So again, no issues as it relates to the seed funds. Damien's going to walk you through the next few slides, and certainly feel free to ask us any questions. I apologize if we're going through this too quickly. And if anyone has questions during the process, let us know. We can catch up at the end and answer those questions.
Thank you, Chris. So the rest of the slides here, we talk about the defined benefit pension plan. The authority participates in the state employee retirement plan. And for these next 2 slides, these were audited by the actuaries, performed valuations on these numbers, which were then audited by the state auditors, and a proportionate share was allocated to the authority based on the inputs that were received from the authority. Based on what we have shown on the screen, we see a net position. It relates to pension liabilities that are owed by the authority, netted down by deferred outflows, which were all calculated by the actuaries and then allocated by the state auditors. You see a big swing from last year, primarily because last year was for a shorter period of time, and also the fact that there were only a few employees at the authority at the time that the calculation was performed. In 2022, the authority hired quite a few more, or in 2021, the authority hired quite a few more individuals. So when this valuation was reperformed, it increased the overall liability and also the contributions that went into the plan, which ultimately resulted in these huge swings. And I just wanted to note that Kavanaugh Consulting performed these valuations as of June 30, 2021, and they're rolled forward for or projected forward for fiscal 2022. And that's how it's typically been done for all state entities. The next slide just talks about the other post-retirement and post-employee benefit plan, which is done similar to the state retirement plan. The Siegel group on this hand does the actual valuation for the state, and then the state auditors again allocate a proportionate share of the liabilities based on inputs that were provided by the employees at the authority. Based on this, you'll see another similar swing where the liabilities increased significantly from the prior year. However, there were deferred outflows that netted it down, and those are slightly offset by other inflows, other projected liabilities that brought it to a net position where we have about $750,000 of impact. Similar to the McDonald Group, Siegel did their valuation as of June 30, 2021, and this was projected forward to June 30 of 2022. And just to note that this valuation for both pension and OPEBs are done every year. And as these are done, it's essentially reset as to what the liabilities are based on various factors that go into the calculation. The next slide just highlights the various information that that the state auditors provided as to the allocation specifically for the authority, and these amounts were pulled directly from those reports and included in the financial statements for the authority. We worked with management to just ensure that the amounts that were provided and presented to the authority have been appropriately recorded, and they're detailed in the schedules within the financial statements. Any questions on those audit areas before I move on to the required communication sections of the presentation? Okay, this section is just required by the auditors to present to management and those charged with governance. Just to let everyone, let you know that we performed journal entry procedures. We inquired of employees of fraud, and we analyzed the authority's programs, controls that are in place to address any sort of fraud or inherent risk that may occur at the authority. And based on those procedures, we did not identify anything of concern. We had fraud inquiry questions with members of management and also a legal counsel, just to see if there are any legal letters that we needed to send out, if there is any type of litigation in process. Based on those, we did not see any need to do any procedures related to that. The next slide just requires us to let the governance know that we've read through the management's disclosure and analysis and the supplemental schedules. These are not required to be audited, so we did not express an opinion on those. We read them to make sure that they were clear and consistent with the audited financials that were presented. Management is responsible for, the selection of any policies and procedures that are presented in financials. Again, Markham read through them and ensured that they were appropriate and that they were clear and concise and neutral to the financials. As discussed, the primary estimates that we spent most of the time with, as Chris mentioned, were the benefit claims reserved, and as I discussed, the pension and OPEB liabilities. During the audit, we worked with management to just ensure, as I mentioned, that the OPEB and pension liabilities were appropriate. We did not have any material unrecorded audit adjustments that throughout the process. We had no disagreements with management, and other than consulting with the state auditors, we're not aware of any other consulting that management had with any other auditors. We did not have any significant difficulty related to the audit, and all related party transactions are appropriately disclosed in the financials. We also have to note that we are independent of the authority for the fiscal 2022 audit engagement. That concludes our presentation. I just wanted to see if there are any questions from any members of the committee.
I have a few questions if I could proceed.
Yes.
Thanks, Tony. All right, good morning, and nice to see you again, and thank you for your presentation. I perused the longer 50-page audit report, and just had a few questions for you. During the course of your audit, do you look at our technology, the security of our technology, any assessment of our technology?
We do. We perform what we call a general controls review, which will look at the access controls to the systems, the program change controls to the systems, and we'll also take a look at how you're positioned with respect to policies on cybersecurity and things of that nature. It's not an extensive testing of trying to hack into the systems or see how things are working, but it's a general controls high-level review that we perform on the IT side.
Okay. Was there, I may have missed it in that lengthy document. Is it addressed in there?
We would typically not include that in the audited financial statements themselves as a disclosure item unless we found there to be a material weakness in internal control, or if we had specific findings that rose to the issuance of a letter or inclusion in that report. So there's nothing to that level. We did have a few recommendations that we worked with management, and they provided responses with respect to those areas, but nothing that would elevate itself to being a material weakness that would be disclosed in the audited financial statements.
Okay, thank you. That's a perfect segue to my next question. On your, I guess the last couple pages, the report, where you say we did not identify any deficiencies in internal controls that we consider to be material weaknesses, which is good. Your next sentence says, however, material weaknesses may exist that have not been identified. So my question is there any further steps we should be considering to identify any material weaknesses that may exist that you haven't identified?
And to put this in context, this is standard wording from the CTPL. So they tell us how the report should be written. So this is, standard language you could see in pretty much all governments. So just to put that in perspective, there's nothing specific related to here that we believe that there are material weaknesses that we didn't detect. But management just in the general course of business should always focus on the reconciliation process. And again, we didn't find any deficiencies related to the reconciliation process, but just overall reconciliations and compensating controls for areas where there, maybe a lack of segregation of duties, which again, management has demonstrated there are compensating controls, but just making sure that those compensating controls are in place. We know that Andrea and Dave review a significant amount of the financial information, and that is a key control to help prevent a material weakness that is out there. So keeping the reconciliation process to be consistently documented and well documented, and also to ensure there are compensating controls if there are segregation of duties issues with a smaller finance department, or if there are certain areas that individuals have certain administrative rights within the systems, just ensure there are good compensating controls in place just to prevent a material weakness from taking place. But we have no suspicions or any concerns as it relates to a particular material weakness that we would have missed. But again, just having a good control process, policies, procedures, and the involvement of Andrea and Dave and Locke and the whole team. They work together as a team in the finance area, just to ensure that there are no material weaknesses.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your very thorough presentation this morning.
Great, thank you.
Are there any further questions from committee members? I think the lack of substantive questions and concerns is a testament to the work that the authority has done with their book of business. So if there aren't any further questions, then I thank Markham for their thorough review and their presentation to the committee this morning. And then we're going to transition on to our actuaries quarterly update. So the Spring Group is going to provide us with an update this morning.
Thank you. And from the Spring Group, we have myself, Harindra Sebastian, Senior Actuary, and then Audrey Wang as well, a Consulting Actuary. And hi, everyone. Good morning, and great to be with you again. I'm going to pull up a presentation that we prepared. We'll go through that. So the purpose of this part of the presentation is to review the quarterly experience focused on the period July 2022 through September 2022. Okay. So we'll start with the key results and show you a couple of slides around that. And then we'll also talk a bit about an updated budget projection. So, and then we'll have time for questions after that. Overall, the key results are presented in this slide. The top table provides the financials, and the bottom table provides the funding metrics that we're tracking against. I'll start off by saying that overall, the fund continues to meet the funding metrics. In other words, the fund balance is deemed adequate. And when we looked at three metrics that we've been tracking, and we talked about quite a bit in the prior meetings, we continue to be lower than the targets, which is a good thing. And so we classify that as meeting target. Okay. Overall, if you look at the table at the top, the sort of middle column provides the actual results, and the column to the right provides the financial projections that we had provided previously based on review of earlier data, and we presented that in one of the prior meetings. Overall, the fund balance at the beginning of the period was 446.3 million. And then what you see in the rows below that is the activity. Contributions earned actual was 103 million. Investment income actual was 2 million. Claims incurred was 69.5 million. Other expenses 11.6 million. So net activity 23.8 million. So when we take the beginning fund balance with the net activity, we end up a little bit higher than where we started off at 470 million. at the end of the quarter. Okay. Compared to the financial projections, we had projected 464.3 million. So we're a little bit higher, and that's driven by two factors. One, the contributions earned was lower, but that was offset, also more than offset by lower incurred claims. Okay. We did see the contributions earned lower in the prior quarter as well. So that has been reflected in the updated projections. So we did see, if you compare the first quarter of 2000, I guess the period January through March, compared to April through June, as well as this period that we're looking at, July through September, we did see a substantial decrease in contributions. Some of it was expected, but it was more than expected that we see that decrease. So we've seen that for a couple of quarters, so we've reflected that in the projection that I'll mention later. And then on the claims side, we do know our current claims projection has some conservatism built into it, partly because we did see lower claims experience in the actual results that we had looked at previously. But we also know, or we expect, that the claims will ramp up. So we were trying to make sure that there's conservatism in those numbers. So we do expect the actual claims incurred to be a little bit lower than what was projected. And we've reflected some of that, not all of it, in the projection. So I'll talk about that in a minute. And then expenses have come in just slightly under what was shown before. Okay. So I'll move on to the next page. Yeah. So this page is intended to provide a graphical illustration of the same information that I talked about before. So the actual information is on the left, the financial projections on the right. We have the fund balance for 446.3 million as of the end of June. The revenue, which increases the fund balance, spending, which decreases the fund balance. So these are the claims and expenses, revenue being contributions received. And so we end up at a net fund balance position of 470.1 million. And then you see the financial projections in a similar fashion to the right. Okay. The next page provides the details behind what I showed before. The intent of this is to provide you with the details, but not necessarily make comments at this point during the presentation. But if there are questions, I'm more than happy to refer back to this page after I go through the next page. This page provides the financial projection for the full fiscal year 2023. That's the period July 2022 through June 2023. So the beginning fund balance being the same as what we saw before, 446.3 million. So at the end of June or beginning of July. And we have contributions earned. We have the updated financial projections in this middle column here and the prior projections in the column to the right. But the contributions earned 443 million, which is lower than what we had before, and reflective of the last 2 quarters of data that we're seeing. So we've lowered the expected contributions that we expect to receive. We increased the investment income just a little bit at an assumption of earnings at 1%. That's been changed to 2% based on current economic environment, so management direction. And then the claims have been lowered a little bit from 364.6 in the prior projection to 348.2 to reflect this last quarter's good experience. What we have done, though, is we've kept the conservatism for the next 3 quarters in there because we don't have enough data. Again, as I mentioned before, we're still very early in the program. And we do expect some more ramp up in claims. So we want to make sure that we're not being aggressive, and this is a more conservative approach, which I think is in line with the approach we are taking. And then the expenses have decreased slightly, again, reflective of the actual data that we received for the last quarter. So net activity, 55.6 million. And so in total, we end up at the end, our projection at the end of this period, as of June 2023, would be 502 million as a fund balance. So we expect the fund to, I guess, grow with the net activity just a little bit based on what we're seeing. Okay, so that really concludes the prepared material. And I'll ask if there are any questions. I'm happy to answer them.
I have a question.
Go
Yes.
ahead.
Thank you. So just trying to marry the two presentations together, the one we just heard, if I heard it correct, I know it was a minute or two late, but I think they represented that they needed a $40 million reserve for claims in our finances, but yet in your report, you're showing claims to be $20 million lower than projected. How do I reconcile those two reports together here? I guess it's not making sense to me at the moment.
So the reserve is in respect of claims that were incurred. The reserve that they were talking about in the prior report was in respect of claims that were incurred during that prior fiscal year and paid during this fiscal year. We did do a fairly extensive calculation behind these numbers to update the reserve estimate. So the numbers here reflect a slight decrease in the reserve by $2 million. So we went from 40 million to 38 million. So that reserve is included in the numbers that are shown here. And I'll just point you to the detailed results here, where we do show a change in reserve of 2 million. So that's reflected in these results. All of these results are on an incurred basis. So particularly if I look at this page here, so it does show the incurred claims of 348.2 million, which is the updated number. And that does include a reserve estimate of 38 million. As of this quarter, we expect that reserve to grow by the end of the year. So that's
so Chris, I saw you came off mute because thank you, Harinder, but that's not exactly the question he's asking. So Chris, were you going to weigh in?
I was going to link it together with the audited financials and based on
that's the question he's asking.
yes, and based on our subsequent cash receipts, I agree with the fact that the reserves appear to be conservatively stated, and it could be as much as $2 million based on what the trends that we were seeing. So certainly we support that reserve bring down, but which is typical when you account for reserves and estimates, you make your best estimate as of June 30, 2022. That's what gets recorded. And any change in such estimate would be reflected as a change in estimate in the next year's financial statement. So in essence, you'd reduce your benefits expense in 2023 by that $2 million bring down in reserves. And that's common in the industry. Typically would just be disclosed in a footnote to indicate that last year's reserves, there's a $2 million change in estimate that was favorable, and that would flow through the financials to be presented. So it's common. You're never going to be able to precisely predict what the reserves are going to be at a point in time. So as of June 30, your best estimate was 40 million. It may turn out to be 38 million, which in my opinion, from a materiality standpoint, is pretty close and pretty reasonable, considering all the things that go into the reserving process with a first year entity paying claims and use of that in experience. So that's certainly expected and reasonable. I am always much more comfortable if your reserves are overstated. If we were in a position when the subsequent reserves look like it was going to be 50 million, I would be more concerned. But a $2 million overstatement of reserves because of conservatism at the end of the year is in line with expectations of what we saw during the audit. And there would be no need to change the June 30, 2022 financial statements for that change in estimate. So hopefully that answers your question.
I think it does. Thank you. And then I guess I always have to ask this question because I see $500 million and thinking that's money coming out of the Connecticut economy. Are we ever getting closer to a position where we could take a look at maybe reducing the amount of money we're taking out of people's paychecks? Or is that too soon to have that type of conversation?
So John, I appreciate that you asked this question because we ask it as well. And I think my answer is always the same. It is too soon. We're not even a year. When January will be a year into benefits. And the concern that I have is certainly we can maybe bring it up at a board meeting and have a more thorough discussion is the the year-over-year adoption rates, because right now our approval rates based on the claims as they're currently being submitted is around 57%. It is in most programs that are out 3, 4, 5 years, it ratchets up to as high as 77%. And there isn't a reason for us to think in Connecticut that adoption rate won't eventually be met. So the problem that other states have had, and we're watching them carefully, this is one of the benefits of being a newer program, is that they have lowered their rates, their contribution rates, adoption rates then rise, then they have to raise their contribution amounts again. And as we've seen this happen, I won't name them because I don't think we need to do that, but in some other sister states, they run into a solvency issue, then they have to raise the rate again. And it turns out that that's not a really popular way that to manage the fund. So I would like for us, and we continue to do this, to just keep a very close eye on the approval rate and the adoption rate, because we'll have people now who've applied for benefits in January coming back because they're in February, because their 12-month period would have expired and they can apply for benefits again. And some people will do that. Then we'll have new people that are coming in. So it may be a more fiscally conservative approach that other states have taken with respect to fund solvency, but other states also have the option of having their general fund come in and provide some other support if they run out of money. We do not have that option, right? We just have to live with whatever we have. So it's so that's where we are now, but that's why it's too soon, because we just don't want to be in a position where we're lowering rates and then we have a fund solvency issue, then we have to raise the rate again, and it or lower the benefit amount, which I think would really make people angry if they're paying in the full 0.5% and then they end up getting some lower percentage of their benefit because we lowered the rate. So that's where we are.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Let's see any. I appreciate your presentation and your thoughtful responses to the committee's questions this morning. All right, we're going to move on now to budget review of spending to date. So Dave, will you please walk us through the current financials?
Yes, thank you, Holly, and good morning, everybody. Okay, you can see my screen?
You can see your screen, Dave.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for the verification, Stephanie. All right, so we are going to go over the results as of October of 2022. For the month of October, the authority had operational expenditures of just over $701,000. That puts us better than budget by over $680,000. And for year to date, our net activity has been $6.4 million with spending of over $3.5 million and better than budget of $2.7 million. Significant expenditures for the month of October included salaries and related expenses of $496,000, contact center expense of $125,000, outreach expense of $43,000. And that also, those are also similar expenses for year to date as well. Some other year to date significant expenses include a grievance adjudication and IT consultant expense. Moving on to our bond activity, we spent $14,000 in bonds this month, better than budget. Year to date, our bond spending has been almost $228,000. Again, better than budget by about $2.5 million. But we do intend to decrease that variance over time on the various projects we're working on, including fund recovery and website redesign. Big picture in terms of the money that was allocated. As Chris and Damian mentioned before, we have $16 million allocated by the state. And through October, we spent $11.4 million with just under $4.6 million remaining for the authority to spend on its various projects. Moving on to our contribution activity. So for the month of October, our contribution revenue was $101.4 million. That represents most of the money for the quarter. The quarter ends September 30th, but they have another month to pay. As the trend we have been seeing, most employers pay at the very end of the period when it's due. As Harindra had mentioned earlier, the contributions for the quarter were almost $102.8 million. So that gives you an idea of how much people are waiting to pay at the last minute. We were less than what we had budgeted by about $2.3 million. That was offset in part by the investment income that we're earning in the short-term investment account. The rate in October was about 3%. And so that's why we're better than budget, because we had budgeted at 0.1%, which is what the rate was at the time. Benefit payments for the month were almost $22.5 million. We've been trending lately at about $5.7 million a week. So that was right in line with expectations. The benefit administrative expense was $1.9 million, as it has consistently been. Our quarterly administrative fee to the authority was $5 million. So that was paid as budgeted. And our seed repayment, our last payment, was made in October. Again, as Chris and Damian had mentioned, it was paid in full in this fiscal year as of October 1st. So the net effect of all that was $72.8 million positive of activity into the fund, and that was better than budget by $13.8 million. Year to date through October, the activity has been $97.8 million, and that is also better than budget by about $50 million. And again, the biggest driver of that is the less than expected benefit claims that have been paid through the course of this fiscal year, as well as prior fiscal year for that matter. What does that mean for the fund? Right now, the fund, as of the end of October, is at $480.9 million. Contributions to date through October have been $726 million, and benefit claims to date since the beginning of the calendar year have been $196.7 million. And as I'm sure John will tell you later, we did break the $200 million mark in November. Looking at our balance sheet, the biggest driver of our total assets of $505 million is our short-term investment fund. That's at almost $460 million. The other significant assets being the impressed account of $12 million and the cash we have on hand for operating funds of $13.8 million. This month, we wanted to present projections through the end of the year compared to our original budget. Now, it's still early in the fiscal year. We've only got 4 months of activity, but we have seen some things so far which would lead us to believe that we would be different than the budget and better than the budget for that matter. We expect our budgeted operational expense was just under $3 million. I'm sorry, our budgeted net income less expenses was budgeted at just under $3 million. We expect to be at $4.7 million by the end of the year. So that's a positive variance of $1.8 million. Main drivers of that we're seeing so far are less than expected spending on payroll and related expenses, our actuary expense, and facilities and equipment. We'll be monitoring that as the year goes on and providing updates to the projection on a monthly basis as we see more things that occur throughout the year. The only significant negative expense variance we're seeing so far is in insurance, and that is due to a timing difference. We had paid an insurance premium in July of this year when we thought we were going to be paying it in June of the prior year. But in whole, our insurance expense on an annual basis in terms of premiums is right where we expect it to be. And our contribution projection, similar to what Harindra had showed, Harindra and Audrey, and their presentation is on an accrual basis. Our budget is on a cash basis. So we do take the numbers that Spring has and we do a accrual to cash conversion, just so we have an apples to apples comparison, but it's all based on the same assumptions. So as we had mentioned before, our contribution revenue is less than what we budgeted. We think it'll come in less than $12 million during the year. That is going to be offset by the better than expected investment income, again, because we're earning a rate higher than what we budgeted, and we expect a higher rate of return in the STIF account for the remainder of the fiscal year. And as I said, the biggest driver is the benefit claims paid. We had a conservative budget going into the year at $448.8 million. We've ratcheted down based on actual activity and also the conservatism that Harindra spoke about earlier built into there as there's a possibility of increased take-up rates during the year. So we want to make sure that we accounted for that. But that came to a better than budget variance of about $110,000. And that's the biggest driver of our projection for the rest of this year compared to the original budget. So we expect a positive variance in the contribution fund of about $51 million. Again, as with the operation budget, we monitor this on a monthly basis. As we get more data in, we will adjust the projection appropriately. But as of now, that's where we think we will be. So that's where we are for the month of October, where we'll think we'll be by the end of the year. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dave. We're going to move on to an update of our claims administration. John, would you please walk us through?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen.
You can see your screen, John.
Thank you. Okay, claims update for November 18th. Total claims filed as of 11/15, 87,095, and November claims through the 15th, 4,152. Claims received status, all approved claims at 49,602, and that's a 57% approval rate. And all denied claims at 25,669, which is a 30% denial rate. Pending claims at 6,696. And then those statistics excluding 6,509 COVID claims that we received to date. And based on the approved and denied COVID claims, when we net those out, the approved claims net of COVID is 48,580. And that takes up the approval rate in the program to 60%. and the denied claims are reduced to 20,182, which is a 25% denial rate when we exclude the COVID claims. And then claims by reason. And again, we can see these trends that have been in place for some time, that employees' own illness or injury is the largest category of claims, followed by the pregnancy, childbirth, and bonding, and care of a family member. And then the other claims in the table on the right-hand side there are substantially lower volume, and they're as noted there. Demographics, claims by age group. Again, cumulative information here from the program through the 15th of November. And largest category by far is the 26 to 41 age category, followed by the 42 to 57 and the 58 to 76. And then again, looking at the other demographics here, claims by gender, it is running still at about a 2-to-1 of female claims to male claims having been filed. Okay, and then when we look a little deeper at some of the demographics, we have claims by age group and leave reason combined here. Again, the own injury or illness is the largest category, and then you can see it broken down by age group here. 26 to 41 is the largest, and followed by the 42 to 57 and the 58 to 76 age group. And leave reason by gender. And again, you can see own injury or illness and how those claims are running female to male here, and caregiver, pregnancy and childbirth, and then bonding as well. And again, cumulative information here, claims by type, continuous, intermittent, and reduced. The largest by far at 91% is continuous claims of over 79,000, followed by intermittent at a significantly lower level at 8%, and reduced schedule as a smaller fraction again. And this is the same table with data through October 22nd that shows the claims filed by town and also per 10,000 residents. And again, you can see that we have a mix of rural, suburban, and urban locations on the table of the top 10 by utilization. And then there's the map that goes along with that shows kind of the density of claim filings in the various towns here that Jacqueline has put together for us. We got that standout up there in the northwest corner in Canaan. And then approvals by leave type. And again, employees' own illness is the largest category of approval, followed by bonding and pregnancy. And then the approved by type over here, continuous, intermittent, and reduced schedule. And again, the same type of flow of information here. Continuous by far, intermittent is the next category, and reduced is smaller portion. And this is the claims customer care center data, which shows the volume of calls. And on a month-to-month basis, we have taken note of the fact that some of the calls have decreased over the past couple of months. So we're monitoring those trends as AFLAC has made enhanced efforts to return both calls and messages in a more timely manner. Excuse me. We believe that the calls into the center, that trend will likely continue as they have a better handle on returning calls and messages in a more timely manner. And then the other table on the right shows the hold time and handle times for those calls as well. And then through November 12th, 371,000 payments released to almost 39,000 unique employees and covering almost 2.2 million total days paid and total gross payments of 213,555,000 dollars have been paid out. And then you can see some of the other statistics here with regard to the benefit amounts on an individual level. And that concludes the claims presentation. Any questions?
John, I have a question. This is Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Thank you again for this report. I find this this level of detail incredibly interesting. And as we get closer to year end, the thought that comes to my mind is how these actual numbers, and in particular the types of leave, compare to the projections that WildFig did a couple of years ago, on which a lot of our decisions were based. And so I'm not asking you for that comparison today, but as we get to the year end, it would be helpful to see, were their projections spot on? Are there any aberrations that have occurred that we should kind of anticipate for the next calendar year?
Yeah. So John, do you mind if I answer? Or did
Oh,
you-
sure. Go ahead.
So Mike, thank you for your question. Actually, John and I were just talking about this last week, as a matter of fact, that I mentioned that at our January board meeting, our presentation would look different, that we would actually provide more of an overview of what the program has looked like. You know, maybe talk a little bit about what we think went well, what we think we would have improved with hindsight. And then part of that presentation will also be looking at what our original actuaries had predicted the program would, how the program would unfold versus what we're actually experiencing. And then maybe also some anecdotal information from other states, because we do talk a lot to other states, you know, who either are asking us about how we stood up our program, or we get advice from them about things that we're doing. So you should see that our plan was to present that at the January meeting, because we just thought it's a year and it makes sense to have more of a retrospective of what we've seen in the course of the last 18 months.
All right, that's great. I appreciate
Okay.
that. Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any other questions for John?
John, I think you're good. I don't think we need to vote on anything
Okay.
else.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank
Stop
you.
the sharing.
Thank
So
you.
that was John Simonetti. I'm talking to John Scott. John, I think we're good.
All right. Thank you.
Okay,
I
you're
gotta go. I'll
welcome.
talk to y'all later.
All
Bye.
right, bye.
Thank you, everyone. So we have come to the end of our substantive materials today. Is there any old business that anybody would like to discuss? Any new business? Don't see any. So may I have a motion to adjourn our meeting this morning?
I'll motion to adjourn.
Thank you,
Second.
and thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, then the motion carries. And our meeting is adjourned. It's 10 o'clock on the dot. Have a happy and healthy holiday, everyone, if you so celebrate. Otherwise, have a lovely weekend, and we'll see each other soon.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
everyone.
Thank
Take care. Bye.
you. Bye.